Some choices carve paths that we cannot unwalk. It's strange how, in a single moment, we can ignore the warnings our hearts whisper to us, choosing instead to leap into the unknown. My leap was my boss, Graham Pierce, a man who both excited and terrified me in ways I couldn't explain. What I couldn't see, was that I wasn't the only one watching my steps. Ellis, my husband, was observing, piecing together every inconsistency, every excuse, and every whispered call. When he finally confronted me, it was with evidence so overwhelming that I couldn't deny a thing. I thought his anger would burn fast, that he would storm away, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my shattered reputation on my own. But Ellis's revenge wasn't an outburst. It was patient, cold, and calculated. He exposed everything, tearing away the flimsy facade I'd constructed with Graham and leaving nothing untouched. My life, my career, my relationships, they all began to dissolve one by one. Sitting here now, I can only wonder what drove me to take that first step. If anyone had asked me 5 years ago, I'd have told them that my life was exactly as I'd always hoped it would be. My career at Pierce Global Marketing was thriving. My marriage to Ellis was steady, and our daughter Cynthia was entering her last year at college, full of excitement about her future. I had everything I thought I wanted, yet somewhere along the way, things had gone stale. Life became predictable, my days ticking by in a familiar pattern. I would wake up before Ellis, slipping into my routine with precision. Exercise, coffee, and then the drive to the sleek, glass-walled offices of Pierce Global, where I would slide into my role as Vice President of Client Strategy. I loved the power my position offered, and I prided myself on being exceptional at what I did. Yet, even my work had lost its spark. Then Graham Pierce took over as CEO, and everything changed. Graham was a force of nature. With his sharp suit, commanding voice, and a charisma that filled the room, he revitalized Pierce Global. He wasn't just another executive sitting behind a desk. He was someone you wanted to impress, someone who could light a room on fire with his intensity. I became captivated by him, first professionally, and then, shamefully, in ways I couldn't admit even to myself. In meetings, he would look at me in a way that lingered a little too long, his gaze piercing through the boardroom decorum. I told myself it was just admiration, that he respected my work. But deep down, I knew I was lying. There was a connection between us, something electric, and I couldn't shake it. One evening, as I was gathering my things to leave the office, Graham stopped by my desk. He looked at me for a long moment before offering a sly smile. "Valerie, would you care to join me for a drink? There's something I'd like to discuss about the upcoming Synergen campaign." The invitation was unexpected, and I hesitated, glancing down at my watch. But curiosity got the better of me. I could have said no. I could have walked away. Instead, I nodded, and we found ourselves at a quiet bar nearby, slipping easily from professional conversation to personal revelations. That night was the first of many, each one pushing us further past the boundaries we'd both sworn to uphold. Weeks passed, and my interactions with Graham became more frequent, more charged. It started as subtle touches, an extra glance, shared secrets that should have been left unspoken. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Each meeting with Graham feeding a hunger I hadn't even known was there. Our first real transgression happened one evening after a late meeting, when the office had cleared out. The room was dark, the city's lights reflecting against the glass walls, casting long shadows. We stood too close, the air heavy between us, and then, without warning, Graham reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about Ellis or Cynthia or the life I'd built over decades. All I could think about was the thrill coursing through me, the idea of stepping into the unknown. I nodded, and the distance between us vanished. What followed was a whirlwind of stolen moments, each one more reckless than the last. We met in hotel rooms, exchanged whispered promises over drinks, and I let myself believe that I could live two lives. One with Ellis, grounded in stability, and one with Graham, full of passion and unpredictability. But I hadn't counted on Ellis's intuition. He had always been observant, but I hadn't realized just how closely he was watching me. His suspicions began as small comments, seemingly innocent questions that I brushed off with practiced ease. "Working late again?" he'd ask. His tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Just the usual workload," I would reply, smiling, hoping to deflect his attention. But each excuse only made him more vigilant. He began checking my phone, noticing the late-night messages from unknown numbers, the vague calls that I would brush off as work emergencies. I didn't realize how deeply he was investigating until it was too late. The strain of leading two lives began to take its toll. I found myself lying awake at night, my mind racing as I calculated every risk, every detail that could give me away. My phone became a constant source of anxiety. I'd become paranoid, deleting messages from Graham the moment they arrived, setting passwords and checking every angle to ensure that Ellis wouldn't find out. Yet, for every measure I took, Ellis seemed to counter it with his quiet, relentless suspicion. His questions became more pointed, his eyes lingering on me with a look that I couldn't decipher. It was as if he knew, deep down, but he was waiting for confirmation. Each time I'd leave for work, he'd watch me, and I could feel his gaze following me out the door. One night, Ellis broke the silence between us. We were sitting in the living room, the house quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. He set his book down and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Valerie," he began, his voice calm but tense, "is there something going on at work that you haven't told me about?" The question caught me off guard, and my pulse quickened. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, to pretend that everything was fine. "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning innocence. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied me, his gaze piercing, as if he were trying to see through the carefully constructed mask I wore. "I just feel like you're not here anymore, like part of you is somewhere else." His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't accusing me, at least not directly, but his statement left no room for denial. I tried to laugh it off, to dismiss his concerns, but my heart wasn't in it. The guilt was beginning to erode the walls I had built, the illusion of control slipping through my fingers. "Ellis, I've been stressed with work," I lied, hoping he would let it go. But he didn't. His eyes remained fixed on mine, searching, waiting for me to tell him the truth. In that moment, I almost did. I almost confessed everything, hoping that somehow, by admitting my mistakes, I could salvage the life we had built. But fear held me back, the fear of losing him, of facing the consequences of my actions. So I kept silent, and in that silence, the divide between us grew wider. The sight of Ellis's carefully organized documents spread across his desk left me paralyzed. It wasn't just the evidence itself that shook me. It was the revelation that Ellis had known all along. Every look, every pointed question, every seemingly innocent comment he'd made over the past weeks now clicked into place. This wasn't a haphazard discovery. It was a well-orchestrated investigation, one he had built brick by brick while he watched me unravel. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling as I took in the details. Ellis had been thorough. He'd saved text exchanges, pictures of Graham and me together outside our meeting places, even notes on my supposed work trips. It was as if he'd left no stone unturned, documenting every misstep with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. A hollow feeling spread through my chest as I realized how long he must have been gathering all this, patiently waiting, biding his time. I thought back to our recent conversations, the hints he'd dropped, and my foolish belief that I could fool him. How long had he known? And what was he planning to do with this damning evidence? I didn't hear him enter the room. One moment, I was alone, grappling with the weight of my own duplicity, and the next, he was there, standing in the doorway with an expression I couldn't read. It was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and something else. Something colder, more calculating. "You found my little project," he said, his voice calm but tinged with a quiet menace. I dropped the file, the paper scattering across the desk. My throat was dry, words failing me as I looked at him, searching for something, anything that would soften the hard look in his eyes. But there was no mercy there. "Ellis, I can explain," I stammered, though even as I spoke, I knew how hollow the words sounded. There was no explanation that could justify what I'd done. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and the silence that settled between us was suffocating. "Explain? By all means, Valerie. I'd love to hear your version of the truth." I swallowed, my mind racing as I tried to think of something, anything, that would make this right. But there was nothing. My betrayal was laid bare before him, meticulously documented, leaving no room for excuses or justifications. It just happened," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't plan for this. I never wanted to hurt you." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "It just happened? That's your excuse?" His gaze bore into me, and I could feel the anger radiating from him. "How convenient. And what about all the times I asked you, Valerie? What about all the chances I gave you to come clean?" I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me, the guilt gnawing at me from the inside. He was right. He'd given me opportunities to tell the truth, and I had chosen deception instead, believing I could continue living this double life without consequence. I was scared, I admitted, my voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" His voice was sharp, each word cutting into me. "You thought you could handle betraying me, lying to my face, pretending like everything was fine while you carried on with him?" Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I looked at him, my heart breaking as I realized the depth of my betrayal. I had taken something beautiful, something solid, and I had shattered it, piece by piece. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Ellis's expression softened for a brief moment, and I thought, just for a second, that he might forgive me. But then his gaze hardened again, and I knew that forgiveness was the last thing on his mind. "Sorry isn't enough, Valerie? Not anymore." He turned away from me, his shoulders tense, and for a moment I thought he might walk away, leaving me alone with my guilt. But then he spoke again, his voice calm and measured. "I've spent weeks collecting every lie, every excuse, every moment you thought you'd hidden from me, and now I'm going to do what you failed to do. I'm going to tell the truth." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a wave of panic rise within me. "Ellis, please," I begged, desperation lacing my voice. "You don't have to do this. We can work through this. We can try to fix it." He looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. "Fix it?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "There's nothing left to fix, Valerie. You made your choice. Now it's time to face the consequences." Without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to process what had just happened. I knew, deep down, that Ellis wasn't bluffing. He was going to expose everything, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. As I stood there, alone in the silence, I felt the full weight of my actions crashing down on me. The life I had known, the life I had so carelessly risked, was slipping through my fingers, and there was no way to hold on to it. The next morning, I woke to a world transformed. I felt like a stranger in my own home, every corner of the house a reminder of the life I had betrayed. Ellis was nowhere to be seen, his side of the bed untouched, his presence haunting the empty spaces like a specter. My mind raced with fear and regret, every moment filled with the dread of what he might do next. I made my way downstairs, hoping to find some sign of him, some indication that he hadn't followed through on his threat. But as I entered the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with a notification that made my blood run cold. It was an email from Ellis. The subject line was simple and devastating: the truth. My hands shook as I opened the email, my heart pounding as I read the contents. He had sent a message to Graham's wife, Avery, detailing every sordid detail of my affair. Attached were copies of messages between Graham and me, photos taken outside of our meeting places, evidence that left nothing to the imagination. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I read the email, my mind reeling with horror at what Ellis had done. He hadn't just exposed my affair, he had sent the proof to Graham's wife, a woman who had done nothing to deserve this betrayal. I could only imagine her reaction, the shock and pain she would feel as she read Ellis's words. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Graham. It was short and panicked, each word filled with desperation. "Valerie, call me. Now." I dialed his number with trembling hands, pressing the phone to my ear as I waited for him to pick up. He answered on the first ring, his voice tense and filled with fear. "Valerie, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Avery just showed me the email. She knows everything." I didn't know he would do this," I stammered, the guilt and shame overwhelming me. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Graham let out a bitter laugh, the sound laced with anger and frustration. "You didn't try hard enough, Valerie. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my family." I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me, each one a reminder of the consequences of my actions. I had risked everything for a moment of excitement, a thrill that had left me standing on the edge of ruin. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I never wanted this to happen." "Sorry isn't going to fix this," Graham snapped. "Avery's already talking about leaving. She's taking the kids and moving out. Everything we had, everything we built, is gone. And it's because of you." The line went dead, and I stood there, staring at my phone, the reality of what I had done sinking in. I had destroyed Graham's life, his family, all for a moment of selfish indulgence. And now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that was falling apart at the seams. In the days that followed, the repercussions of Ellis's calculated exposure rippled through my life like shockwaves, each one more devastating than the last. Every morning I woke with a gnawing dread, my mind consumed by the knowledge that my betrayal was no longer a secret. And with each passing day, I could feel the walls of my life crumbling around me. The first true fracture appeared within my own family. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Cynthia, our daughter, came home unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of cold coffee, my mind swirling with 1,000 anxious thoughts, when I heard her voice behind me. "Mom?" she asked, her tone laced with confusion and concern. I turned to face her, my heart skipping a beat as I took in the expression on her face. It was clear she knew. Perhaps not all the details, but enough to see the weight of betrayal written in her mother's eyes. I forced a smile, though I could feel it falter. "Cynthia, I didn't know you'd be home. Is everything all right?" She frowned, her gaze piercing, refusing to be placated by my forced cheerfulness. "I came to check on Dad. I know something's wrong, Mom. He's barely returned my calls for days, and he sounded broken." Her voice caught on the last word, as if the reality of her father's pain had struck a nerve she couldn't ignore. A lump formed in my throat, and I struggled to find the words. How could I explain any of this to her? How could I admit the depth of my own failings, knowing it would only drive a wedge between us? "Your father and I? We've been going through some things," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's complicated, Cynthia." "Complicated?" she repeated, her tone turning sharp. "Is that all you have to say?" The disappointment in her voice was like a dagger to my chest, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could I justify any of this? How could I make her understand something even I could barely comprehend? Before I could respond, she shook her head, her expression one of hurt and betrayal. "You know, I used to think you and Dad were perfect," she said, her voice filled with a sadness that cut me to the core. But now I don't even know who you are. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, the silence around me thick with regret. The weight of Cynthia's words lingered with me, haunting every moment as I went through the motions of daily life. Each step, each breath, felt heavy, burdened by the choices I had made and the people I had hurt. My affair with Graham had been reckless, yes, but it was the aftermath, the sheer destruction Ellis had wrought, that left me reeling. In the midst of it all, I received another message from Graham, asking to meet. My heart pounded as I read his words, filled with an urgency and desperation that mirrored my own. I knew it was risky to see him, but a part of me longed for the comfort of his presence, even if it was temporary, even if it only added to the wreckage of my life. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. Graham looked as worn and weary as I felt, his usually confident demeanor shattered by the fallout of our actions. "Avery's taken the kids and left," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "She's staying with her sister and she's talking about divorce." The guilt that had been simmering inside me flared into a raging fire, consuming every shred of peace I had once taken for granted. This was my fault, all of it. I had allowed myself to be swept up in the thrill of forbidden passion, and now I was paying the price. "I'm so sorry, Graham," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, or your family." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "We both made choices, Valerie. We both knew the risks. But now we have to live with the consequences." We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts. The once innocent excitement of our affair had given way to a bitter reality, and there was no escaping the damage we had done. "What are we supposed to do now?" I asked, my voice trembling. Graham sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but one thing's for certain. There's no going back. We've crossed a line, and there's no undoing what's been done." I nodded, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. Our affair had cost us everything. Our marriages, our families, our very identities. And as I looked at Graham, I knew that whatever connection we had shared was now tainted, twisted by the pain and betrayal we had caused. There was no future for us, only the cold, harsh reality of the choices we had made. After my meeting with Graham, I returned home, dreading the inevitable confrontation with Ellis. I found him in the living room, his gaze distant as he stared out the window. The silence between us was thick, oppressive, and I knew that the time had come to face the full weight of my betrayal. "Ellis," I said softly, stepping into the room. "We need to talk." He turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "There's nothing left to talk about, Valerie," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I swallowed hard, feeling the sting of his words. "Please, Ellis. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. I want to fix this, to make things right." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Make things right? How exactly do you plan to do that? You can't undo what you've done. You can't erase the betrayal." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I struggled to hold them back. "I know I hurt you, Ellis, and I know that saying sorry isn't enough, but I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had." He shook his head, his gaze hard. "What we had is gone, Valerie. You destroyed it the moment you chose him over me." The pain in his voice was palpable, and it cut through me like a knife. I had never fully grasped the depth of the hurt I had caused until that moment, standing before him, watching as the man I had loved for so long slipped further and further away. "There's no going back," he continued, his voice filled with a quiet finality. "You made your choice, and now I have to make mine." My heart ached as I watched him turn away, the distance between us growing insurmountable. I knew, deep down, that I had lost him, that there was no way to salvage the love we had once shared. In the weeks that followed, my world continued to unravel. Cynthia barely spoke to me, her disappointment a constant reminder of the choices I had made. Ellis filed for separation, a legal formality that felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. And Graham, well, he had his own family to contend with, leaving me to face the wreckage alone. The house felt empty, hollow. Every room was a reminder of the life I had destroyed, of the love I had taken for granted. I tried to fill the silence with work, but even that had become a minefield. Word of my affair with Graham had spread through the office, and I could feel the judgmental stares of my colleagues, the whispered conversations that ceased the moment I walked into a room. I had become a pariah, an outcast in my own world, and the isolation was suffocating. I found myself longing for the days before the affair, for the stability and security I had once taken for granted. But those days were gone, lost to the choices I had made. One evening, as I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, I realized that I was truly alone. I had lost my family, my friends, and my reputation. And for what? A fleeting thrill, a moment of passion that had cost me everything. I closed my eyes, a single tear sliding down my cheek as I accepted the full weight of my actions. There was no one left to blame but myself. Months passed, and I slowly began to rebuild, though it felt more like stumbling through the ruins of my life. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the memories of the home I had shared with Ellis. I spent my days alone, reflecting on the choices I had made and the people I had hurt. I reached out to Cynthia, hoping to salvage some semblance of a relationship, but she remained distant, her trust in me shattered. She was polite, but cold, her words a constant reminder of the disappointment she felt. As for Ellis, he had moved on. He had found peace in the aftermath of my betrayal, and though we remained cordial, the love we had once shared was a distant memory, a casualty of my own selfishness. Looking back, I couldn't understand what had driven me to make the choices I had made. I had sacrificed everything for a fleeting thrill, for a moment of passion that had left me standing in the wreckage of my own life. I would never undo the damage I had caused, never erase the pain I had inflicted. But as I sat alone, a single thought remained, haunting me. Some choices carve paths that cannot be unwalked, and I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. People say every decision leads somewhere, but no one tells you what to do when the path you've taken veers into shadows you never meant to walk through. My name is Sylvia Grant, and this is the story of how I lost my way. It didn't start as anything out of the ordinary, just a work trip, two professionals tasked with representing the firm. But that's the thing about shadows. They creep in slowly, unnoticed, until they're all around you. His name was Liam Rourke, my stepson. My husband's only son. When Darren married me 5 years ago, Liam and I had barely exchanged more than a few polite words at holidays and family dinners. I saw him as Darren's pride, a younger version of the man who had swept me off my feet. He was bright, ambitious, and already carving a name for himself in the creative industry. I never imagined I'd see him as anything more. But in the span of 2 weeks, everything changed. A smile that lingered too long, a laugh shared over a private dinner, the warmth of his hand brushing mine, it all added up to something I couldn't control. What started in that coastal hotel room didn't end when the trip was over. Liam and I stepped into something we weren't prepared for, and it wasn't long before the cracks in my carefully constructed life began to show. If you're looking for a story with heroes and villains, this isn't it. This is a story of mistakes and consequences, of betrayal and redemption. It's about choices, both the ones we regret and the ones we'd make again despite the cost. And it all began on that trip. The morning I left for the trip, Darren was in his usual spot at the breakfast table, his face buried in the financial section of the newspaper. He barely looked up as I placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "Don't forget to check in with the client after your meeting," he said, his tone clipped. This account is too big to risk. I know, Darren, I replied, keeping my voice even. Everything is under control. He nodded but didn't respond, his attention already back on the stock market. This was Darren. Always focused, always calculating. He had built his fortune on precision and control, qualities that had initially drawn me to him. But as the years passed, those same qualities began to feel like chains. Liam was waiting for me at the office, leaning casually against the reception desk with a coffee in hand. "Morning, Sylvia," he said, flashing me a grin. "Morning, Liam," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Liam had recently joined the firm as part of the creative team, and while I'd initially been wary of working with my stepson, he had proven himself to be talented and dedicated. Still, there was an unspoken tension between us, a line we both seemed careful not to cross. "Ready for the big trip?" he asked, his tone light. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. We were headed to the coast to pitch a major campaign to a luxury hotel chain. The account was critical to the firm's future, and Darren had insisted that I take Liam along to gain experience. The resort was stunning, a sprawling property overlooking the ocean, with sleek, modern architecture and lush gardens. As we checked in, I couldn't help but notice the way Liam carried himself with confidence, his easy charm disarming the hotel staff. "You know," he said as we walked toward our rooms, "if this marketing thing doesn't work out, I could always be a tour guide." I laughed despite myself, the sound surprising me. It had been a while since I'd felt this light. Our first day was packed with meetings and presentations. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, casting the resort in a warm, golden glow. Liam suggested dinner at the hotel restaurant, and though I hesitated, I agreed. We were colleagues here, I reminded myself, not family. The meal was relaxed, our conversation shifting from work to more personal topics. Liam shared stories about his college days, his struggles to step out of his father's shadow, and his dreams of building something entirely his own. "You're lucky," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You seem like you've always known exactly what you wanted." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I've got it all figured out?" "Don't you?" he asked, his gaze steady. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't have it all figured out. My marriage to Darren was far from perfect, and my career, while successful, often felt like a lonely climb. But I wasn't about to unload my insecurities on Liam. "It's not as simple as it looks," I said finally. "Nothing ever is," he replied, a hint of understanding in his voice. The next few days followed a similar pattern, meetings during the day, casual dinners in the evening, but something shifted as the week went on. Our conversations grew deeper, our laughs more frequent, and I began to notice things about Liam I hadn't seen before. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about his ideas, the easy confidence in his smile, the warmth in his voice when he spoke to me. I told myself it was just the closeness of the trip, the shared pressure of the project. But part of me knew better. It was on the fifth night that Liam suggested we review the campaign materials in my suite. "We've got a big meeting tomorrow," he said. "Might as well make sure everything's perfect." I hesitated, aware of the line we were towing, but his request was reasonable, and I couldn't think of a good reason to say no. "All right," I said, "just for a little while." When he arrived at my suite, I was struck by how casual he seemed, his jacket slung over one arm and a folder in his hand. We settled on the couch, our laptops open between us as we reviewed the presentation. The work kept us focused at first, but as the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. A joke turned into laughter, a shared glance lingered too long, and I felt the space between us grow smaller. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into his smile, his touch, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. But when the power flickered and the room went dark, I realized I wasn't imagining anything at all. The room fell silent as the lights flickered and went out, leaving us bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I sat frozen for a moment, my mind grappling with the sudden shift from professionalism to intimacy brought on by the darkness. "Well, that's inconvenient," Liam said, his voice breaking the silence. He reached for his phone, switching on the flashlight and aiming it toward the table. I let out a soft laugh, trying to steady myself. "I suppose we'll have to wait it out." "You okay?" he asked, his tone warm and genuine. "Yes, of course," I replied, brushing off the knot forming in my chest. But the truth was, I wasn't okay. The darkness had stripped away the safe distance between us, leaving only the sound of our breathing and the charged energy filling the room. Liam moved closer, his flashlight now illuminating the folders on the table. "We can still go over these," he said. "If you want." I nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Let's do that." As we worked, our hands brushed over the papers, a small, unintentional touch that sent a jolt through me. I pulled back instinctively, but Liam didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he chose not to. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice low. "It's fine," I said quickly, hoping to mask the tremor in my tone. But the moment lingered, an invisible thread pulling us closer. I could feel his gaze on me, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. It happened so suddenly that I didn't have time to process it. One moment we were reviewing the campaign, our voices steady and professional. The next, Liam was leaning toward me, his face inches from mine. "Sylvia," he said softly, his voice barely audible. I looked up, my breath catching as our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, vulnerability, longing, a quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was tentative at first, a brush of lips that quickly deepened into something more. His hand cupped my cheek, his touch warm and steady, and I felt myself sinking into him, my defenses crumbling with every passing second. When we finally pulled apart, the reality of what we had done hit me like a wave. "We can't do this," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I know," he replied, his forehead resting against mine. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Sylvia. I haven't been able to for weeks." His words sent a rush of emotion through me. Fear, exhilaration, guilt, and something else I couldn't name. "This is wrong," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Liam said, his tone gentle. "But it doesn't feel wrong." When I woke the next morning, the events of the night before played on a loop in my mind. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sunlight streaming through the window, and tried to make sense of what had happened. It wasn't just the kiss. It was everything. The way he had looked at me, the way his words had unraveled something inside me that I thought I had locked away for good. But as much as I wanted to believe it was a momentary lapse in judgment, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. That day, we went about our work as if nothing had happened. Liam was as professional and charming as ever, and I did my best to mirror his composure. But every glance, every accidental touch, every shared laugh felt like a secret exchange, a reminder of the bond we had formed. It wasn't long before the tension became unbearable. That evening, after the final meeting of the day, Liam knocked on my door. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding as I opened it to find him standing there, his expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied, "but can I say something first?" I nodded, my chest tight with anticipation. "I don't regret last night," he said, his voice steady. "I know it's complicated, and I know it's risky, but I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, Sylvia." His words took my breath away. I had spent the entire day convincing myself that what had happened was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But hearing him say it out loud made it feel real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Neither do I," Liam said, taking a step closer. "But I know I don't want to lose this." In the days that followed, we fell into a dangerous rhythm. By day, we were colleagues, professional, focused, careful not to draw attention. By night, we were something else entirely. Our time together was stolen and fleeting, filled with whispered conversations and quiet laughter. We met on the terrace of the hotel under the cover of darkness, the sound of the waves our only witness. "This is insane," I said one night, my voice laced with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Probably," Liam replied, his arm wrapped around me. "But I don't care." For a while, it felt like we were the only two people in the world, wrapped in a bubble of secrecy and desire. But the closer we grew, the harder it became to ignore the weight of what we were doing. Everything changed on the final weekend of the trip. I was in the middle of a presentation when I saw him. Darren, standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. My stomach dropped as our eyes met, and I stumbled over my words, quickly regaining my composure. When the presentation ended, Darren approached me, his smile polite but his tone sharp. "Surprised to see me?" he asked. "Very," I replied, forcing a smile. "What brings you here?" "I had some business nearby," he said casually. "Thought I'd drop in and see how things are going." His gaze flickered to Liam, who was standing a few feet away, speaking with a client. "You and Liam seem to be getting along well?" Darren said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. "We're working together," I replied evenly. "That's all." "Good," Darren said, his smile tightening. "I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings." The warning in his words was clear, and I felt a chill run down my spine. That evening, Liam and I met on the terrace, our usual sanctuary now tinged with tension. "Darren knows something," I said, my voice shaking. "He doesn't know anything," Liam replied. "He's just suspicious." "But what if he finds out?" I asked. "What happens then?" Liam took my hand, his grip firm and steady. "We'll deal with it. Together." His words were reassuring, but the doubt lingered in my mind. The reality of what we were doing was becoming impossible to ignore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a precipice. On the final night of the trip, we found ourselves alone in my suite once again. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words, and I felt the weight of everything we had shared pressing down on me. "I don't want this to end," Liam said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "Neither do I admitted, my voice breaking. The decision to cross the line again wasn't made with words. It was made in the way he looked at me, the way his hand brushed against mine, the way my resolve crumbled as he pulled me into his arms. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. This time, we surrendered completely. Returning to the office after the trip was like stepping into a pressure cooker. Darren's unexpected appearance at the resort lingered in my mind, but it was my assistant, Claire Harding, who began to raise the most immediate alarm bells. Claire had worked for me for years, efficient, sharp, and loyal to a fault. But recently I had noticed a shift in her demeanor. She had always been detail-oriented, but now her attention felt invasive. Her questions about the trip were casual on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of curiosity that made my chest tighten. "How did the meetings go?" she asked one morning, her eyes flicking toward Liam's office. "Productive," I replied curtly, hoping to end the conversation. "And Liam?" she pressed. "He seems like he's been busy lately." Her tone was light, but I could feel the weight of her insinuation. "Liam performed exceptionally well," I said firmly, meeting her gaze. "That's all you need to know." She smiled, but there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't finished digging. Darren's behavior grew more erratic in the weeks following the trip. He began showing up at the office unannounced, his presence a constant reminder of the delicate line I was walking. One afternoon, he stopped by my office, his expression unreadable. "You've been distant lately," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "Is everything all right?" "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "Work has just been demanding." Darren nodded but didn't move to leave. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You know, Sylvia," he said, his voice dropping, "trust is the foundation of any good relationship. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to repair." The meaning behind his words was clear, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "I hope you're not implying anything," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Not at all," Darren replied, his smile cold. "Just a reminder." The situation became even more complicated when Darren's son from a previous marriage, Aidan, returned to the firm for a short-term project. Aidan and Liam had never been particularly close, their dynamic strained by years of competition for their father's attention. At first, I welcomed Aidan's presence, believing it might divert Darren's focus. But it quickly became clear that Aidan's arrival only added another layer of tension. "Liam seems distracted lately," Aidan said one evening during a staff meeting. "He's been handling a lot of responsibilities," I replied, hoping to deflect. "Or maybe he's handling something else," Aidan said, his tone pointed. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Aidan was perceptive, and I knew he wouldn't hesitate to dig deeper if he suspected something was amiss. The breaking point came one afternoon when Claire approached me with a folder in hand, her expression grim. "Can we talk privately?" she asked, glancing around the office. I followed her into my office, closing the door behind us. Claire placed the folder on my desk, her hands trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if I should bring this to you, she began, her voice hesitant, but I thought you'd want to see it first. I opened the folder, my heart sinking as I saw the contents. Inside were photos, grainy but unmistakable, of Liam and me on the hotel terrace during the trip. The angles suggested they had been captured by security cameras, and while they weren't explicit, the intimacy between us was undeniable. Where did you get these? I asked, my voice shaking. They were flagged during a routine audit of the client's security footage, Claire explained. I was reviewing them for an unrelated matter, and I recognized you. I stared at the photos, my mind racing. The implications were clear. If these photos got out, the fallout would be catastrophic. Claire, I said slowly, this stays between us. Do you understand? Claire hesitated, her expression conflicted. I want to help you, Sylvia, but this is serious. If anyone else sees these... They won't, I interrupted, because you're not going to tell anyone. For a moment I thought she might argue. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping. I'll do my best, she said quietly. The photos didn't remain a secret for long. A week later, I received an anonymous email with the images attached, along with a single sentence. Promotion or exposure, your choice. My hands trembled as I read the email. The reality of the situation sinking in. Someone knew. And they weren't going to keep quiet. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to determine who might have sent the email. My mind kept circling back to Claire, but a part of me didn't want to believe she was capable of such betrayal. When I confronted her, she denied any involvement. I swear, Sylvia, she said, her voice trembling, I didn't share those photos with anyone. But the damage was already done. The situation came to a head during a company-wide meeting. Darren had somehow learned about the photos, and he wasn't interested in keeping things quiet. Care to explain this? He said, standing in the middle of the conference room, with the photos displayed on his tablet. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as my colleagues turned to look at me. My heart pounded as I tried to think of a response, but Darren didn't give me the chance. You've humiliated me, he said, his voice rising. You've betrayed my trust, my family, and this company. Darren, please, I began, but he cut me off. Save it, he snapped. You're finished here, Sylvia, and so is Liam. Later that evening, Liam came to my apartment, his face pale but determined. We can fight this, he said, his voice filled with conviction. Fight what? I asked, my voice breaking. The photos are real, Liam. There's no denying what we did. That doesn't mean we have to let Darren destroy us, he replied. We still have options. But I wasn't so sure. The scandal had already begun to spread, and I could feel my grip on everything I had worked for slipping away. As the fallout from the photos intensified, Darren launched a full-scale investigation into the firm, claiming he wanted to ensure complete transparency. But Liam and I both knew the truth. Darren was using the situation as a smokescreen to hide his own misdeeds. It was Liam who discovered the first clue, discrepancies in the firm's financial records that suggested embezzlement. I think Darren's been funneling money into offshore accounts, Liam said, showing me the evidence he had uncovered. My mind raced as I processed his words. If we could prove Darren's misconduct, we might be able to turn the tables. Liam and I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence, working in secret to avoid arousing suspicion. It was a dangerous game, but we both knew it was our only chance to salvage our reputations. One night, as we pored over the documents in my apartment, Liam reached for my hand. No matter what happens, he said softly, I don't regret any of this. Do you? I hesitated, the weight of his question pressing down on me. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't lose you. The news of my relationship with Liam spread through the firm like wildfire. Whispers followed me through the hallways, and meetings were tense and charged. Darren's public condemnation during the company-wide meeting had made me a pariah, and Liam was facing just as much scrutiny. The hotel chain we had worked so hard to secure was threatening to pull their account, citing concerns over professionalism. Meanwhile, Darren's investigation into the firm created an atmosphere of fear and distrust among the staff. I tried to keep my head down, focusing on the work that remained, but the damage was done. My authority had been undermined, my reputation tarnished. And yet, The weight of the scandal paled in comparison to the fear of what Darren might do next. One evening, as we worked through the growing pile of evidence against Darren, Liam set down his laptop and looked at me with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. I braced myself, the tension in his voice setting me on edge. "What is it?" "I think Darren's been using the firm's accounts to cover up personal debts," he said. "I found a series of transactions that don't add up, money being funneled into shell companies that don't exist." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Darren's ruthless behavior, his sudden obsession with transparency, it all started to make sense. "If this gets out," I began, but Liam interrupted. "We can't let him bury this," he said firmly. "He's willing to destroy us to protect himself. We have to fight back." The following week, Darren escalated his campaign against us. He leaked additional photos to the press, framing me as a manipulative predator and Liam as an opportunistic playboy. The headlines were brutal. "Stepmom Scandal Rocks Top Marketing Firm." "Affair and Allegations, Power Couple's Downfall." My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, and I stopped leaving my apartment unless absolutely necessary. Liam, meanwhile, faced relentless attacks from colleagues and former friends who accused him of betraying his father. But Darren didn't stop there. Late one night, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a man I didn't recognize, a burly figure with a cold smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Message from Darren," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short, chilling message. "Walk away, or face the consequences." The breaking point came when Liam and I confronted Darren directly. It was late in the evening, and the office was empty, except for the three of us. "You've gone too far," Liam said, his voice steady but seething with anger. "This isn't just about us anymore. You're destroying the entire firm." Darren leaned back in his chair, his expression cold and unbothered. "You brought this on yourselves," he said. "Don't blame me for cleaning up the mess you made." "You're the one embezzling money," I said, stepping forward. "We've found the records, Darren. We know what you've been doing." For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes, though he quickly masked it. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice sharp. "And even if you did, who's going to believe you? The disgraced VP and her boy toy? Good luck with that." His words stung, but I refused to back down. "We're taking this to the board," I said. "They'll see the evidence for themselves." Darren's smile faded, replaced by a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You'd better be sure of what you're doing, Sylvia, because once you start this, there's no going back." That night, I returned home to find my apartment in disarray. Drawers had been pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. My laptop was missing, along with the hard drive where Liam and I had stored the evidence against Darren. I called Liam immediately, my voice trembling as I described the scene. "It was Darren," he said, his tone grim. "He's trying to scare us." "It's working," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "We can't stop now," Liam said firmly. "We have to keep going. He's desperate, and that means we're close to something he doesn't want us to find." With our evidence compromised, Liam and I knew we had to act quickly. We decided to present what we had left to the board of directors, hoping to convince them to launch an independent investigation. The meeting was tense. The board members divided between loyalty to Darren and concern over the firm's reputation. "This isn't about a personal vendetta," I said, addressing the room. "It's about protecting this company from corruption." Liam presented the financial records we had uncovered, outlining the discrepancies and shell companies linked to Darren. As he spoke, I watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to unease. When he finished, the room fell silent. "We'll review the evidence," the chairman said finally. "But if you're wrong, there will be consequences for both of you." That evening, Darren confronted me in the parking garage as I left the office. His face was twisted with rage, his usual composure shattered. "You think you've won?" he hissed, stepping closer. "I think the truth is finally coming out," I replied, refusing to back down. Darren's hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But then he stepped back, his expression hardening. "You've made a mistake, Sylvia," he said, "and you're going to regret it." The following week, the board announced their decision. Darren was to be removed from his position, effective immediately. The evidence of his embezzlement was undeniable, and his actions had put the firm's future at risk. The news was a relief, but it came with a cost. I knew my role in the scandal had left my position untenable, and I submitted my resignation the same day. Liam, too, decided to leave the firm, unwilling to stay in the shadow of his father's legacy. "It's time to start fresh," he said, his voice resolute, "for both of us." We spent our final evening together in my apartment, the air heavy with unspoken words. "I'm proud of you," I said softly, my hand brushing against his. Liam smiled, though his eyes were filled with sadness. "I couldn't have done this without you." As dawn broke, we said our goodbyes, knowing it was the only way forward. Liam kissed me one last time, his touch filled with a mixture of love and farewell. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice steady. "Not really." I nodded, though I knew the path ahead would be one we walked separately. Life after the firm felt like standing on the edge of an unfamiliar horizon. I had spent years defining myself through my career, my marriage to Darren, and the facade of stability I had worked so hard to maintain. Now, those foundations were gone, leaving me to piece together a new version of myself from the fragments. The first few weeks were the hardest. I avoided the news, unwilling to face the headlines that dissected the scandal. My resignation had been a quiet affair, but the media had already painted me as the villain in a sordid tale of betrayal and ambition. Liam, ever protective, called often to check on me. His voice was a lifeline in the midst of my self-imposed isolation, but our conversations grew shorter as the days passed. I knew he was trying to move on, and I didn't want to hold him back. "You'll be all right, Sylvia," he said during one of our final calls. "You're stronger than you think." I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I thanked him anyway. With Darren's removal from the firm, the company began the slow process of rebuilding its reputation. The board released a carefully worded statement, distancing themselves from the scandal, while pledging to implement stricter oversight. Darren, meanwhile, retreated into the shadows, his once imposing presence reduced to a footnote in the firm's history. For my part, I found solace in the small things. Morning walks through the park, afternoons spent redecorating my apartment, and evenings curled up with a good book. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt free to make my own choices. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, and my heart leapt as I tore it open. "Sylvia, it's strange, isn't it? How life has a way of forcing us to confront ourselves in ways we never expected. I've been thinking about everything that happened. About you, about Darren, about what we built together, however fleeting it was. You taught me more than you'll ever know. You showed me what it means to fight for something, even when the odds are stacked against you. And while I wish things had been different, I don't regret a single moment. I'm in New York now, working for a small creative agency. It's nothing glamorous, but it's honest work, and it feels good to start from scratch. Maybe one day, our paths will cross again. Until then, I hope you find the peace you deserve." The letter was brief, but it carried a weight I hadn't realized I was still holding. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I allowed myself to cry, not out of sadness but out of gratitude for what we had shared and the strength it had given me to move forward. Several months later, as I was browsing a local art gallery, I turned a corner and stopped in my tracks. There, on the wall, hung a painting that was unmistakably Liam's work. A bold, abstract piece that seemed to pulse with energy and emotion. The gallery owner noticed my interest and approached with a smile. "That's one of our newest acquisitions," she said. "The artist is young, but he's incredibly talented. His pieces have been selling fast." I nodded, unable to tear my eyes away from the painting. It was as if Liam's essence was imprinted on the canvas, a reminder of everything we had been through and everything he had become. "Do you know him?" the owner asked, her tone curious. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." That evening, I sat by the window in my apartment, a glass of wine in hand as I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance. The painting had stirred something in me, a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Liam and I had walked a dangerous path, one that had cost us both dearly. But as I looked back on everything, I realized that it wasn't all regret. There had been moments of joy, of connection, of discovery. He had challenged me to see myself in a new light, to embrace the parts of me I had long ignored. And though our story had ended, it had left an indelible mark on my life, one that I would carry with me as I moved forward. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I found myself thinking of Liam's letter, his words echoing in my mind. Maybe one day, our paths will cross again. Maybe they would, or maybe they wouldn't. But either way, I knew I was ready for whatever came next.